When we first moved into the house where I grew up, I began to hear strange things, specifically, voices calling my name from the opposite end of the house. I would be in my room, playing with Legos or something, and suddenly, I'd hear my dad call my name from his room. Dutifully, I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, but they'd always tell me that they hadn't called my name. This happened about once every few days, and as a little kid, I started to think they were playing some sort of joke on me. One night, it happened again. I heard my name and went to ask what they wanted, like always. But just as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, which was all the way on the other side of the house. At that moment, I knew no one was tricking me because I was standing right in front of both of my parents, watching them. For a long time, I kept this to myself. It wasn't until later that my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy, a condition that can cause auditory hallucinations. For a while, I thought maybe I had it too, so I got myself checked out. But the results came back clear. I was completely fine. So, I still have no idea what was calling my name all those years. Even now, whenever I visit and stay over, I still hear that voice at night. When I was very young, I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights. My sister was a light sleeper, so this arrangement allowed me to stay up until dawn without disturbing her. However, I often ended up falling asleep on the couch, lulled by late-night shows on Nick at Night. One night, I was jolted awake by a prickly, instinctual feeling. I immediately sat up and stared out the front window. Living in rural Georgia, our property was surrounded by a dense forest of trees. In the perfect moonlight, I saw the silhouette of someone perched in one of those trees. Our family dog dashed to the window, snarling fiercely at the mysterious figure. Terrified, I ran to my parents' room and frantically explained that there was a strange person outside. My dad grabbed something for defense and darted outside with the dogs, ready to confront the intruder. I clung to my mom, trembling, until Dad returned. He said he hadn't seen anyone and told me to go back to bed. Deciding not to sleep in the living room again, I went to my regular bedroom and filled my sister in on what had happened. Dad stayed up, making regular rounds through the house with a cup of coffee in hand. As the household settled, I finally thought, I can sleep now. But sleep wouldn't come. Glancing towards my window, I noticed the same man standing outside. In the moonlight, I could see him clearly as he put a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture before turning around and running straight into the woods. I swear, I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. This happened to me last summer while I was staying at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room on my computer when I suddenly received a call from my sister. That alone was odd since her room is just down the hallway from mine. She could have easily walked over to talk to me in person. I reached for my phone to answer, but the call ended just as I picked up. I figured she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and headed to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her. I panicked and burst into the room, but there was no one there. After she calmed down, she told me she had woken up to see a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, which is what made her scream. I then told her about the call, but she insisted that she hadn't called me. She said her phone wasn't even in the room, it was downstairs in her purse. Sure enough, when we checked, her phone was still in her purse. The strange thing is, I had the call log on my phone, showing she had called me, but there was no record of it on her phone. To this day, I've never been able to explain what happened that night. In 2012, my family moved to North Carolina, and the house we lived in had something sinister within its walls, perhaps a demon or a shadow figure. The most terrifying event, one that still haunts my nightmares, happened one morning when I woke up to find that the power was out. I went to ask my sister, who was 12 years older than me, about it. She mentioned that our parents had gone out to have the electricity transferred back to Michigan or something like that. With no power and no parents around, 10-year-old me decided to take my DS and play a racing game on my parents' bed, which was more comfortable than mine. Their bedroom was located at the far end of the house, with the doorway leading directly into the kitchen and dining room area. What happened next is something I remember vividly to this day. As I was lying on my stomach, engrossed in my game, I suddenly got this uneasy feeling and a voice in my head that said, "Pause the game and look up." I did as it said, and what I saw made me freeze in fear. Standing in the doorway, where the dining room meets the kitchen, was a tall shadow figure. It was at least 7 feet tall, taller than my dad, who's 6 feet 2 inches. This figure wasn't just a silhouette, it had depth, with varying shades of darkness that made it look three-dimensional. Half of its face appeared to have been blown off, as if by a shotgun blast, with skin peeling away from the skull and strands of muscle barely holding the flesh in place. Sunbeams from the skylight passed straight through this thing, as if it wasn't even there. I don't know how long it stood there, staring at me, but eventually, it turned and walked deeper into the kitchen. Before that day, I never understood what people meant by being frozen with fear. Now I do because I was completely paralyzed. I don't know how long it took, but eventually, I felt my body relax, and I could finally breathe again. I remember getting off the bed and praying to any god that would listen that the figure wouldn't still be there when I walked out of the room. Thankfully, it was gone when I checked. I rushed to my rabbit's cage in the dining room to make sure she was okay. She was huddled at the back of her cage, ears straight up, eyes wide, and breathing fast. She saw it too. After ensuring she was all right, I bolted to my sister's room to wake her up. She was a light sleeper due to our awful neighbors, a story for another time, but she let me stay in her room while she slept, and I played my game quietly at the foot of her bed until our parents returned. I never saw that shadow figure again, and I hope it stays that way. This was just one of the many unsettling events that occurred in that house, but it was by far the most intense. If anyone is interested, I'm happy to share more stories, including the ones involving our disturbing neighbors. Edit. Due to popular request, I'll be sharing more events that happened in that house, along with the bizarre encounters with our neighbors. Here's how it all started. From the day we moved in, our neighbors made it clear they didn't like us. Apparently, the people who lived in our house before us were either family or close friends of the neighbors and had been evicted. So, when we moved in, they were furious. While we were unloading our belongings, the neighbor on our right side walked down the street behind our van. He was carrying what I believe was a shotgun, and as he passed my dad, he held it out threateningly and said, "You see this?" My dad, who was unloading my sister's scythe at the time, calmly responded by showing him the scythe. After that, the neighbors did everything they could to make our lives miserable. They would drive their off-road 4x4s on our side of the property line, sometimes even hitting our house with them. My sister was terrified they would try to break in and harm us, so she barely slept at night. The neighbors' dogs seemed to sense something in our house as well. They would bark at our house at all hours of the day and night. On one side, there were 2 large, aggressive dogs, and across the street, there were about 8 chihuahuas that would regularly run into our yard and try to bite us. One night, after the neighbors had been especially obnoxious, I was in the dining room playing with a toy. My mom and sister had gone out to get pizza, so it was just my dad and me at home. My dad was in his bedroom watching TV. Suddenly, I got the feeling that I was being watched. I looked up and saw that my dad's Homer Simpson radio head was staring straight at me. The eyes of the radio, which were the knobs for the channels, were usually left in odd angles, but now they were eerily focused on me. I quickly turned it away and went back to playing. A few minutes later, I felt that same creepy sensation again. This time, something told me to look to my right, out of one of the main bay windows. In the window closest to the computer room, at the other end of the house, I saw the silhouette of a person's head. I was so scared that I jumped off the chair and ran to tell my dad. We went back to check, but there was nothing there. We assumed it was one of the neighbors, but after leaving the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the head might have been inside the house, not outside. Besides those 2 major events, I only saw small things like shadows of people stepping away from doorways or arms moving away. These weren't unusual to me, as I'd seen similar things in other houses we lived in, which I now know were also occupied by something other than just my family. I didn't know about these next experiences until after I watched my sister's YouTube vlog about the house, which I will link at the beginning of this post and at the end. My sister regularly heard the footsteps of a child running through the house, accompanied by occasional giggling. One day, my dad, while getting ready for church in the master bathroom, heard what sounded like chanting coming from the woods behind our house. This wasn't the first time we'd lived in a house or on property linked to cult activity. The first time was before I was born. The last event I'll mention happened on our final day in that house, just hours after I saw the shadow demon. Our parents had returned with a moving truck, and we were all working to load our belongings onto it. When there were only a few things left to pack, my sister and I sat down to read. Suddenly, we heard a strange noise. At first, we thought it was the wind, but no windows were open, and the sound seemed to be coming from the center of the house. We later agreed that it sounded like a man howling or saying hello in a long, drawn-out tone. After searching the house together, we decided to get out of there as fast as we could, and we haven't been back since. My creepy dreams saved my life. As a kid, I was always calm and dependable. I went to bed early, slept through the night, and rarely caused any trouble. But one July, something strange started happening. Every night, a little after 1 a.m., I would get out of bed, go downstairs, close all the doors, and then crawl into bed with my mom, saying, "The hot man made me do it." I vaguely remember this. There was an overwhelming urge to close the doors. I had to. The hot man, a black shape that burned if I got too close, would stand on the kitchen counters and scream until I made sure all the doors downstairs were shut. After 2 weeks of this, my mom woke up at 1 a.m. to the smell of smoke. The kitchen was on fire. She grabbed me, called 911, and then realized something chilling. The doors in our house were fireproof. The faulty wiring in the kitchen had caused the fire, and if those doors had been left open, the fire would have spread quickly, and I would have died. We still live in the same house, but I refuse to go into that kitchen alone. Even now, the memory of those nights and the hot man haunts me. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my family, my dad, mom, 2 brothers, and I lived in a tiny house. One night, we all decided to sleep in the living room together because there was a late-night singing contest on TV that we loved to watch as a family. In the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. Everyone around me was fast asleep, my mom, dad, and my brothers, who were sleeping on either side of me. As I lay there, I noticed something strange in the darkness. In the adjacent room, I could see the silhouette of a woman sitting on the sofa, brushing her long hair. My first thought was, why is Mom brushing her hair in the dark? Still groggy, I turned to my side, trying to fall back asleep. That's when I saw that my mom was still lying next to my brother, sound asleep. A wave of realization hit me like a cold chill. I remembered that my mom had short hair. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the reality of what I was seeing sank in. Terrified, I pulled the blanket over my head, trembling in fear until I eventually managed to fall back asleep, though I have no idea how long that took. The next morning, I told my family what I had seen, but no one believed me. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents got me a second-hand mattress. Not long after, I started having the same unsettling dream every single night. In the dream, I would see a woman emerging from a house deep in the woods. She would step out onto the porch and scream angrily at some children playing in a sandpit in front of the house. This dream haunted me for 2 years, repeating itself night after night. It got so bad that I could even hear the woman's screams while I was awake. My mom, worried about what was happening, decided to get rid of the mattress. She ended up giving it to a friend of hers who didn't believe in anything supernatural and needed a mattress for her son. As soon as the mattress was gone, the dream stopped. But then, the friend's son started waking up in the middle of the night, terrified, having vivid night terrors. This is going to be a long post, but I need to share it. I seem to have this sixth sense, or something like it. For example, whenever I'm approaching a particular location, like a house, the closer I get, the more I can sense the energy of the place. I like to say that the atmosphere changes. It's like I can feel either good or bad vibes the nearer I get. The bad vibes feel like a heavy presence coming over me, almost like a thick fog or a weight pressing down on my chest. There was one time when the atmosphere was so oppressive that I refused to even step foot into a home. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I had to turn around and go back home before even reaching the door. My first paranormal experience happened when I was in the 3rd grade. I live in Pennsylvania, and this took place in Pittsburgh at the William Penn Hotel in the middle of the city. The atmosphere felt off, but I was too young to fully understand what was happening. One night, I went to use the bathroom before going to bed. I did my business and started to wash my hands, but when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. Instead, I saw a pale-skinned woman with black hair and dark, empty eye sockets staring back at me. I ran out of that bathroom so fast and told my parents, but they didn't believe me. Later on, I visited Gettysburg, a place known for being super haunted. While I was there, I got grabbed and scratched in the Jenny Wade house. Later that day, we ate at the Dobbin House Tavern. I excused myself to use the restroom, and while standing at the urinal, I heard the stall door next to me slam shut. Then, I heard the laughter of a little child. When I asked the waitress if the place was haunted, I could see the blood drained from her face. My grandmother's house was another place that was extremely haunted, to the point of demonic activity. In the middle of the night, you could hear heavy footsteps coming up the basement stairs. Occasionally, you'd hear pounding behind the closet door in the back bedroom above the garage. One night, we were bringing my grandmother down for the holidays, and I felt pure evil. About 30 minutes away from the house, I started to feel a very heavy presence, and it got worse the closer we got. When we finally pulled up, the feeling was unbearable. It was as if the house was watching us. Once inside, I had a really hard time breathing. That night, I felt something in the darkness stalking us as we moved through the house. All I could feel was pure evil and hatred. Finally, last summer, my entire family went to the beach, and I had to stay behind to watch the dog. The first 4 nights alone were normal, but on the 5th night, things changed. In the middle of the night, I heard our Alexa in the kitchen say, "Sorry, I can't understand that," followed by soft piano music playing. The next night, the same thing happened. And then again the night after that. Later, I found out that the previous owner of the house had died there and had loved playing piano music. TLDR, I'm pretty sure I see and feel dead people, kind of like the kid in The Sixth Sense. This might not be the most thrilling story, but it was definitely a terrifying experience. When I was a teenager, my family would visit a particular house every winter for the holidays. The house was located in a medieval town in England and was incredibly old. Most of the house felt fine, but there was one room that was different, a room that was supposed to be my bedroom. On the first night I stayed there, I ended up dragging my mattress across the house to my siblings' room in the middle of the night. The feeling I got in that room was unbearable, like something there was filled with anger and hatred, and it did not want me there. I don't believe in demons, and even now, I'm skeptical about ghosts. But if demons do exist, that room would be the closest I've come to experiencing something demonic. The feeling was very real, and it wasn't just me who felt it, everyone in the house noticed it. My sister even made a game out of jumping into the room from the hallway just to feel the shift in atmosphere. I was convinced that the source of this malevolence was the chimney. There was always something off about it. Given the house's location in a medieval English town, there are naturally a lot of ghost stories associated with the area. My mom even has a book full of them. One of those stories specifically mentions a ghost living in a fireplace on the very street where this house is located. I'm not sure if it refers to the same house, but it's a pretty eerie coincidence. When I was about 5 years old, I used to see strange things. I was very sheltered by my parents from anything scary or explicit, so I had no real fear of the dark or anything else. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. I woke up in the middle of the night because I really had to pee. When I opened my bedroom door, I was met with pitch black darkness. Then, about 15 feet away from me, I saw two diamond-shaped, glowing red eyes hovering low to the floor. Being raised as a Christian, I immediately thought it was a demon. I closed my door, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But when I opened the door again, the eyes were still there. I repeated this for what felt like hours, opening and closing the door, hoping the eyes would disappear. But they didn't, and I was too terrified to leave my room. Eventually, I gave up. Scared out of my mind, I crawled back into bed, curled up under the covers, and somehow fell asleep. That night, I had one of the scariest nightmares of my life, one that still haunts me to this day. In the dream, it was the apocalypse. I was terrified, so I ran into my room for safety. But there, in the light, was the same creature I had seen earlier. It was a hairless, demon-like figure with a tail. For some reason, I reached out to touch it. As soon as I did, it spun around and bit my neck so fast that everything started to spiral out of control. I woke up the next morning, still shaken, but relieved to find that the eyes were gone. I immediately ran to the bathroom and took the most satisfying piss of my life. Even now, at 21, the memory of that night still sticks with me. It might not sound terrifying to everyone, but experiencing something like that as a child leaves a lasting impression. About 2 weeks ago, my brother started hearing voices at night. He said it was a deep, masculine voice calling to him from outside his room, urging him to come out into the yard. The voice always seemed to come from the middle of the yard, just beyond the safety of the house. The next day, my wife and kids went out, leaving me alone with my brother. That night, we noticed something moving in the small patch of trees in our backyard. Curious and a little uneasy, we decided to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. On our way back inside, though, something unseen threw us over 5 feet into the air. We scrambled to our feet, panicked, and rushed back inside. After a few tense minutes, we realized my brother had lost his shoe in the yard. He needed it for work the next day, so we had no choice but to go back outside. This time, we brought an axe for protection, hoping it would ward off whatever had thrown us. We quickly found the shoe and hurried back inside. Once safely indoors, I asked my brother to check his back because he said it felt like it was burning. When he lifted his shirt, he screamed. There were several long, fresh scratches running down his back. Shaken, we went out to the front porch to retrieve something, but as we stepped outside, we saw someone, or something, looking into the back window. The figure was unnaturally tall, over 7 feet, as it had to be to see through the window. Thoroughly freaked out, we decided to stay on the porch until my wife returned home with the kids. A few minutes later, we heard heavy footsteps running toward the front yard from the side of the house, where the driveway extends. Gravel flew as if being kicked up, but when we looked, nothing was there. That was enough for us. We bolted back inside and stayed put until my wife came home. Whatever that thing was, it didn't seem able to enter the house. I'm not sure what to believe, but one thing's certain, something strange is happening, and it's terrifying. This strange phenomenon has happened to me twice, and to this day, I have no idea what it could be. Back when I was in high school, I used to train for track and field by running in a church parking lot. The place was almost always empty during the weekdays, making it the perfect spot for practice. I would run there every day unless something else came up. One day, while I was walking my usual loop around the parking lot, I approached a specific area, and out of nowhere, my entire body felt like it was being sucked or warped into some sort of spatial distortion. Naturally, I freaked out and quickly moved away from the spot. I tried to brush it off as maybe dizziness or delirium, something that could explain what I had just felt. But curiosity got the better of me. I walked back to the same area where it happened, and sure enough, the same thing happened again, though it felt slightly less intense this time. I jolted back, just like the first time, and by now, I was genuinely curious about what was going on. I tried to replicate the sensation a third time by stepping into the spot again, but this time, nothing happened. The second time this happened, I was at home, just sitting at my desk playing Minecraft. Out of nowhere, I felt that same warping sensation again, and I jolted out of my chair to get away from it. This is probably one of the strangest things I've ever experienced, and I still have no explanation for it. I live in South Louisiana, near a place called Crétin Point Plantation, pronounced Créchon, a notoriously haunted site with a rich history. You can even Google it. The plantation was allegedly used as a Civil War hospital, with its front doors serving as stretchers. There are also rumors about the infamous pirate Jean Lafitte being involved in something there. The area is steeped in history, and many people have reported seeing all kinds of strange things around the plantation. When my friends and I were about 16, we had a regular Saturday night tradition, drinking a lot of beer and driving around the dirt roads surrounding the plantation, which we called ghost hunting. This basically meant getting wasted, listening to rap music, chain smoking, and occasionally stopping to roll down the windows to see if we could spot anything unusual. One night, surprisingly, we actually did. We had stopped on the main road in front of the plantation, which is in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but sugarcane fields, dirt roads, and the occasional trailer home. We got out of the truck, turned off all the lights, and started looking around. One of my friends suddenly pointed out something strange and began freaking out, telling us to come and see. He was pointing towards some small cabins to the side of the main house, which I believe were old slave quarters. There, in front of one of the cabins, I saw something bizarre, a woman, down on her knees. We were immediately puzzled, wondering why a woman would be kneeling in her yard at midnight. I ran back to the truck, grabbed some binoculars, and took a closer look. Sure enough, it was a woman. She very slowly stood up and began walking across the yard towards the house, moving with an eerie calmness, as if she had all the time in the world. Her arms gently swayed by her sides as she crept forward. That's when I noticed something even stranger. She seemed to be faintly glowing. It was odd because there was no full moon or anything that would explain the glow, and nothing else around her was illuminated, only her. She looked as though she was made of dim moonlight. Then I realized I could faintly see the shapes of the trees on the other side of her. She was slightly translucent. I handed the binoculars to my friends, wondering if I was just drunk or imagining things, but they confirmed that they saw the same thing. We watched her for what felt like an eternity, probably around 4 minutes. The longer we watched, the more the reality of what we were seeing sank in, and an intense, indescribable fear began to grip us. I wasn't the only one. My friends were visibly shaken as well. It wasn't funny anymore. Just as we started to really freak out, we heard the sound of gravel crumbling and saw headlights approaching from about 1/8 of a mile down the road. The second we noticed the car, without the lights even shining towards us or the woman, she simply dimmed out. It was like someone turned off a light. She just faded away. We all panicked and got out of there as fast as we could. I don't really believe in God or the afterlife or anything like that, but this experience sure as hell made, and continues to make, me question things. I have no idea what we saw, and I'm not saying it was definitely a ghost. We were drunk, 16 years old, and anything is possible. But it was by far the strangest thing I've ever witnessed, and you can make of it what you will. Your guess is as good as mine. This is a long one, but it's the most memorable experience I've ever had, and I've always wanted to share it. I hope you all enjoy it. When I was 6 years old, my family lived in a haunted duplex. Our cousins lived on one side, and we lived on the other. We believed that the spirits haunting the house were those of the family who had lived there before us. That's what I was told, at least. During that time, my dad would wake up very early in the morning, around 4 or 5 a.m., to go to work. I remember it was always still dark outside. I was a daddy's little girl, and we had a tradition. I'd wake up with him, we'd eat breakfast together, and then he'd leave for work while I'd go back to sleep. One day, I woke up and saw a dark figure standing in the doorway of my room. It turned and walked away. Thinking it was my dad, I got up and followed it down the hall. But when I reached the stairs leading to the living room, I noticed all the lights were off. I thought maybe my dad was in a hurry and had left without eating breakfast with me, so I turned around and went back to bed. This happened a few more times. Each time, I would get up, trying to catch my dad. Then one day, I asked him why he kept leaving without waiting for me. My dad looked confused and asked what I meant. I told him that I kept seeing him walk down the hall and leave without me. His expression changed, and he told me he had quit his job a while ago and hadn't been waking up early at all. At that point, I think my parents realized something was seriously wrong. Around the same time, I became very ill. I missed so much school that the school even threatened to expel me if I didn't return soon. Our family followed shamanism back then. We believed in spirits and often prayed to our ancestors. My parents enlisted the help of a shaman to perform a ritual to identify the figure I was seeing and understand what it wanted. The shaman revealed that it was the ghost of the woman who had lived there before us. Her family had all died in a tragic car accident. The shaman said that the spirit wanted to take my soul and that to stop this, I had to stop following it. At the time, I was too young to understand what was happening, and my parents didn't want to scare me, so they didn't tell me any of this until I was much older. After the ritual, my parents had me sleep in their room. I didn't think much of it because, well, I was a kid. That night, I woke up again and saw the shadowy figure. I got up to follow it, but halfway across the room, my dad woke up and called out to me, "Mio Bucket, where are you going?" "I'm right here." I stopped in my tracks, turned around, and went back to bed. After that night, I never saw the figure again, and I quickly recovered from my illness. My parents must have taken the situation very seriously because, years later, my mom told me about a dream she had during that time. In the dream, she and an unknown woman were arguing. My mom was in her bedroom, and the woman was standing just outside the door. The woman's face was hidden in shadow, but my mom could see that she was wearing a long skirt. The woman was yelling at my mom to get out of her house, and my mom was yelling back that it was our house now. As a child, I was never scared. I never felt like I was in danger. But now, thinking back on it, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. The house has since been torn down, and it's just a flat piece of land now. Whenever my siblings and I drive past it, we always joke that it was probably demolished because no one could live there due to the hauntings. I work at a school that just might be haunted. There's an old auditorium on campus that we use for plays, musicals, and sometimes pep rallies. It's a pretty creepy place when you're alone, and many of the staff say that's where the ghost resides. For a while, I taught in a classroom right across the hall from it. During my first month there, something strange kept happening. My lights would shut off by themselves. The light switch was right by the door, so at first, I assumed it was one of my students messing with me. It always happened during my planning period, so I asked the teacher next door to tell his class to stop fooling around in my room. But one day, he shut the door, and it happened again. This time, I was sitting across the room, and no one was in the hallway. The lights just turned off on their own. A few days later, I was testing a website on my projector during my planning period because I wanted to see how the colors would display. Out of nowhere, my projector started moving. And I don't mean it just slid down, no, it moved up and down, then side to side. My classroom is on the top floor, so there's no room above mine that could explain it. At this point, I wasn't scared, just annoyed. So I shouted at whatever was causing it to stop messing with my stuff. The projector immediately stopped moving, and my lights never turned off by themselves again. The last incident happened in the auditorium itself. We were having a sort of field day, and I was running the auditorium as a makeshift movie theater. I was sitting in the back, keeping an eye on the kids, when I heard someone loudly whisper my name, like a stage whisper. But when I turned around, there was no one behind me. A student nearby said she heard it too, but we both just shrugged it off and kept watching into the Spider-Verse. Other staff members, especially those who've been there longer, have even more interesting stories to tell.